Taupo has been ruled out with concussion, while Grace Steinmetz and Carla Hohepa have foot injuries. Renee Whitcliffe, Hazel Tubick and potential debutante Kelsey Tinetti come in as the replacements. Meanwhile, the All Blacks hooker Dane Coles will make his first start for the Hurricanes this season, but captain Ardie Savea is unavailable for Saturday's match against the Rebels. Coles has made 2 appearances off the bench since returning from injury. And the Mystics star goal shoot, Grace Nweke, has been ruled out of their 2 ANZ Netball Premiership matches this weekend. The 20-year-old suffered an ankle injury in last weekend's win over the Tactics. The Mystics say a return-to-play program is being worked on for Nweke, and they expect to provide a further update early next week. That's the news. More earthquake trouble for the Hutt DHB.
But it also says, hey, look, the nature of the failure mechanisms, we believe they could lead to a sudden loss parts of the structures. So it wasn't as if it passed with flying colours in the 2011 DSA.
A local MP calls for accountability.
I'm going to be asking some pretty serious questions as to how this has actually happened. The reliance on the 2011 report, why a more up-to-date one.
Structurally Sound Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. From Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Periods of rain, possibly heavy. Easing to a few showers this evening. Showers become more frequent and heavier tomorrow morning. Scattered rain for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. From Waitomo to Wellington, including the Central High Country and Wairarapa, also for Nelson and Marlborough. Occasional rain with squally thunderstorms and hail possible. Easing to showers for Nelson and Marlborough tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers with some heavy, squally thunderstorms and hail, easing tomorrow evening. Canterbury, periods of rain about Canterbury High Country, otherwise mainly fine. Showers are spreading north tomorrow morning, then becoming confined to the coast later. Showers are forecast for Otago and Southland, possibly heavy with thunderstorms in the west, easing tomorrow afternoon or evening. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, rain developing this evening, clearing tomorrow morning but returning tomorrow night. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnau koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. An extra $350 in the back pockets of more than 2 million Kiwis is what the government's promising. The surprise cherry on top of today's budget is aimed at easing the pain of sky-high inflation, hitting the household finances. But the lion's share of the cake goes to health with a record $11.1 billion as the government presses ahead with its plan to scrap DHBs and replace them with a central agency. Finance Minister Grant Robertson wanted a balanced budget. So did he get it right? Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Grant Robertson is used to crisis budgets after 2 years of COVID. This year, a new budget and a new crisis.
Budget 2022 has been delivered in a difficult time for the global economy and for many New Zealanders.
The comment comes against a backdrop of red-hot inflation, the sheer cost of living biting hard, petrol over $3 a litre, grocery prices through the roof. The Finance Minister knew he needed to deliver some relief.
Through this budget, the government is investing more than $1 billion in a cost of living package targeted at low and middle income households.
The centrepiece, a one-off sweetener, a $350 payment to some 2 million people aged 18 or over. The money goes to all those earning $70,000 or less, unless they're already receiving the winter energy payment. That means nothing more for beneficiaries. This is money for the middle.
A lot of people can't afford to buy the necessities that they need, so I think it will help.
I feel like it's something for people who are struggling because the cost of living is so insane at the moment.
When you've got things like vet bills and dentist bills, no, it won't make any difference. I'd rather just lower living costs.
There is some movement in that area. Half-price public transport has been extended for 2 months and made permanent for people with a community services card. The fuel tax reduction will run for another 2 months too.
The here and now matters, but so too does tomorrow, and making sure that we provide for a secure future.
And therein lies the second story of the budget, a whopping $11.1 billion boost in health funding over the next 4 years, the long-lasting medicine to balance the short-term sugar hit. The money will help wipe DHB deficits before the entities are scrapped, meaning the new replacement, Health NZ, will start with a clean slate. Pharmac gets a big bump too, another $191 million, and there's nearly $160 million for ambulances and emergency choppers.
We are nothing without our health, and there could be no greater response to the COVID pandemic than ensuring we have better funded and stronger health services. And that is what this budget delivers.
Grant Robertson, as we know, is utterly, totally addicted to spending.
It's a line National has well rehearsed. It says the situation is getting worse, not better. It calls the cost of living package a band-aid to the books, a blowout. In all, Christopher Luxon says it's the backwards budget.
The sad news for New Zealanders is that Kiwis are going backwards, the books are going backwards, and the outcomes are going backwards.
The budget shows deficits for the next 2 years, with a return to surplus delayed a year until 2025. The overall economic outlook is subdued but not despairing. Treasury's picking wage growth to start picking up, but not higher than inflation. Officials, though, stress the uncertainty given global conditions in the past few years have certainly highlighted that. Who knows what crisis next year might bring.
Our political editor Jane Patterson joins us now from Parliament. Jane, there's always one secret that they keep, right? Tightly held, the cherry on top. What's the politics around this cost of living package, do you think?
So this was a surprise $1 billion cost of living package pulled out of actually the remaining or the remnants of the COVID fund that had been allocated but not spent. So it was kept a pretty well kept secret this time. Sometimes budgets can leak. However, this one, Grant Robertson pulled out of the bag $350 cash payment to about 2 million New Zealanders, and as anticipated, public transport and also the fuel discount, although not as far as we might have expected. Again, you know, there was a bit of speculation about whether that public transport subsidy, the half price price would be continued or be made permanent. It'll carry on for 2 months for everybody, and then we'll go into cardholders, community cardholders will get that as a permanent move. So a nice little package. The politics of it though, Labor obviously acknowledging that there's a massive cost of living crisis and that this may not completely help people out of the financial hole that they might be in, but it is something. National, as you heard, backwards budget. It's not enough. They said that the $350 payment is a measly sum. It's not going to do anything to help cost of living and is not good enough from the government.
If we got a buck for every time Grant Robertson said the word balance in the lead up to the budget, we might be in surplus right now. So I'm wondering, has he hit the right balance, and what's been the immediate reaction?
Look, I think, Lisa, in every budget time, people, you know, they do take a wider look, but often people look, what is here for me, and especially in these tight financial times. So I think that sweetener, absolutely, it will be a welcome relief, but the point about it is it's temporary. $350 absolutely will be welcomed by some families, but it's not really enough to make any fundamental change to a family's financial situation. It's a sweetener, it's a short-term hit, and the government will be hoping that by the time all of those extra measures come off, then inflation will be easing back and it'll be an easier situation. But of course they had these big spending commitments. We're a year out from a difficult election for Labor, and they had climate change as a major policy commitment and these health reforms that they are very, very wedded to. So that was a huge amount of the money already gone. So I think people would have wanted to see more in the cost of living, but again, that balance of actually building too much costs into future years as well, with the economy softening, would have been very much on Grant Robertson's mind.
So have they done enough to tick off those key promises in climate change and health?
The climate change package is still under debate, but it has certainly marked a fundamental change, and there's a lot of money there that really starts that grinding transition away from fossil fuels. Not always the sexiest of funding in terms of a government to promote, but it certainly looks at that longer term. There's going to be debate about the cash for clunkers and some of those other policies, but I think all round the climate change package has been pretty well received. Health reforms are going to be a different matter altogether. National and ACT are diametrically opposed to the health reforms. They don't see the need to put the DHBs into this one big bureaucracy, and of course the Maori Health Authority being created alongside it. They argue that it is just a centralisation. It's an ideological driven policy by the government and a huge waste of money. The government, on the other hand, is saying that the problems with the health sector that we've seen over the years have not just been because of underinvestment, but because of a lack of coordination. For example, trying to negotiate pay deals with all of these different DHBs was a nightmare. So they're arguing it needs to be. So I think that is really the debate's going to come through, because that was a very large part of the spending commitment today.
Thanks, Jane. That is our political editor, Jane Patterson, joining us live from Parliament. So New Zealanders over 18 who earn less than $70,000 a year will get a $350 cash injection paid over 3 months. It excludes beneficiaries and pensioners. Our reporter, Katie Todd, joins us now from Whānau. Katie, how's the news been going down there?
Kia ora. Well, Northland actually features on the cover of today's budget, you might have noticed, so it's a pretty fair question to ask what the region's residents think of the contents. Now, we've been up in the far north in Kaitaia, where we've spoken to some food banks about what they say is astronomical demand at the moment, directly as a result of the cost of living rises. It's notably not just beneficiaries who are coming through their door, it is people who are earning low wages, between $35,000 and $55,000. 500 of those people turned up at the backup food bank in the past year alone. And so when we spoke to people on the streets of Whangarei today, it was unsurprising that most of them supported today's cash injection. Here's what they had to say.
Free money is great. Yeah.
Would it help ease the current cost of living?
Yeah, gas, food, it's gone up, everything's gone up. Nappies, formula.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, it's pretty handy.
What would you spend $350 on?
Probably food.
For what purpose?
For easing the cost of living.
One off?
Yes.
Yes.
Paid in 3 parts.
Yes. Even though we'll be paying it ourselves through taxes, but yeah, why not? Give everyone a boost.
I don't know, probably spend it on something stupid, like shoes or something.
What'd you say, how much? 350?
350.
It doesn't come out of the ether, someone's got to pay for it, so that's our taxes. So I would think it's going to cause more inflation.
So a largely positive and somewhat cautious approach from Whangarei residents to that $350. Now, we know that will be paid in 3 instalments this year in August, September and October. The government estimates that 2.1 million New Zealanders will be eligible.
Thanks, Katie. That's Katie Todd joining us live from Whangarei there. The half-price public transport fares will be extended for another 2 months till August. The temporary cut in fuel tax and road user charges stay in place till then too. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us now from downtown Auckland. So Nick, how's that going down?
Hi Lisa, it is going down extremely well. I've got my mask on and that's because we are deep in the depths of Britomart Station underneath the streets of central Auckland. For people who aren't watching, it's rush hour here and if you're judging by the number of foot traffic, well, half price is really working. It is creaming with people down here. Now, the other part of this, of course, is that half price will continue from mid-September as long as you've got a community services card. Now, we spoke to some people today about how they felt about half price continuing. Most of them, of course, were on board with it, but some of them had some other ideas about how public transport should be structured, not only in Auckland, but around the rest of the country as well.
Personally, I don't think public transport is expensive here, but I think when there is an aspiration to have more public transport, it needs to actually go out into the suburbs further out of Auckland that are getting extremely developed and actually are being treated as urban parking areas without any public transport to get you out of the place.
I'm definitely happy about it, and I would really like for it to keep going. I think it's a good idea to keep it going. It definitely helps a lot as well, being a student, obviously, with just keeping the costs down low. And I think it does bring a lot more people sort of off the streets in other areas as well, which I think is what they're trying to do.
Wonderful gesture. Coming from South Africa would never happen. So count their blessings in New Zealand, that's for sure.
It should be extended to taxis, and if the price controls comes in, the land transport comes in,
and put a price on the taxi tags. So it will be very important for everybody, so everybody survives on that.
I'm thrilled that they're extending it for another couple of months. We really needed it, and it has encouraged a lot of people on. People like me, it's okay because we've got a gold card, and we don't have to pay anyway. So I think that, I love it. I love that idea.
And Lisa, of course, the other part of this is those cut in fuel taxes, which the government has obviously done to make fuel that little bit cheaper for people at the moment. As we know, it's all expensive. That is on for another 2 months as well. And rest assured, we will have more stories about the shock to the system for people when those tax cuts come off again. Now, do stick with us. Later on in the show, we will have someone who works with some of our most impoverished people in Auckland about that $350 bonus payment that people will be getting as part of this budget.
Thanks, Nick. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joining us live there from the Britomart Transport Hub in downtown Auckland. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira, anei nā kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What do you make of the budget, specifically the extension of the cut price public transport and also $350 one-off payment for people who earn less than 70k over the age of 18? You can apply for that. It's a cost of living relief. Well, you can text us Pātui Mai 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Finance Minister Grant Robertson joins us now from Parliament. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Can you just talk us through how you settled on the criteria for this cost of living relief? You've got to be over the age of 18, earn less than 70k, and you can't be eligible for a winter energy payment. So how did you reach that point?
Yeah, so obviously on the 1st of May, the winter energy payment kicked in for superannuitants and those on income support, and that's tiding them through this period. What we recognised was there was a wider group of New Zealanders who were really feeling the pressure from these cost of living increases. So we looked at those earning less than $70,000 and said, let's give them a payment. It equates to about half of the couple rate of the winter energy payment. So, we're obviously kind of aligning it in a sense there. And as a result of both winter energy and this new cost of living payment, 81% of working age New Zealanders are going to be given some support. So it is targeted, it is short term, but it's a contribution we can make for both middle and low income earners to be supported through this period.
So that means obviously that people who are on benefits are not eligible for this cost of living relief, right? Don't they need extra help during winter too?
Yes, and they're getting it through the winter energy payment.
On top of that, Minister,
Sure.
Because there are, rising costs all over the shop, fuel, groceries.
Yep, absolutely, and that's the reason why you saw the big changes we put in on the 1st of April, which themselves built on the lifts that we've given to main benefits in both 2020 and 2021. 364,000 people, $109 a week better off on income support than they were when Labor came into office. If you've got children, it's $175 per week on average better off if you're on income support since we came in. So we've continually provided and boosted funding for those on the lowest incomes, but we recognised that there's also a group of middle income earners doing it tough right at the moment. There were also, Lisa, other things in today's budget that will really help those low income earners, and in particular it's that extension of the half price public transport permanently if you're a community services card holder, which includes people on those benefits.
I want to get to that in a second, but so have you just identified the squeezed middle class? They're people under 70k, the squeezed middle.
Look, you obviously have to set a level somewhere when you're making a payment like this. And our observation and the things that we're obviously all seeing and hearing around us is that, those particular costs driven by global inflation pressures at the petrol pump or at the supermarket are putting pressure on a wider group of people. People like me, Lisa, we don't need that, and that's what we would have got with National's untargeted tax cuts. This is a targeted short-term payment. And there is one other point I should probably make, which is we needed to strike a balance here of doing something that wouldn't overly exacerbate the very problem we're trying to resolve, inflation, and untargeted approaches like the tax cuts Nationals are proposing could potentially have exacerbated inflation much more than what we settled on here.
Payment ends potentially before wages increase at a rate that keeps pace with inflation. So are you going far enough?
Yeah, look, it's a balance always, and we understand that this is a contribution. It's not going to cover every additional cost that people have, but we think it's a worthwhile contribution. It should, on the forecast that we've got, get us through the real peak of inflation, but there is always other support available, particularly for those on lower incomes.
Okay, so the fuel tax relief and the road user charges, you're extending that 2 months. Are you really going to phase it out when you get to that point? People would have got used to it, they will have come to rely on it, and nobody's suggesting that petrol's going to drop significantly in price by that time. So are you really going to phase it out and send people back to having to try and come up with the bucks?
Yeah, look, that is our plan. We've set the dates and we've obviously got a sequencing of the payments that you've seen here, and we're bringing it to a more targeted level of support for people earning less than 70,000. So that kicks in when the 2 months comes up. I think also everybody probably understands that the fuel excise duty cut can't go on forever. Apart from anything else, we want to get on with all of the other changes that we're making to decarbonise our public transport fleet and decarbonise our private transport fleet as well. I would say this though, Lisa, I've been through 2 years of COVID, so I'm never going to say never, but this is the plan that we've got, and this is what we've outlined for New Zealanders with dates where it will end.
Okay, let's move to health. $11 billion over 4 years, only $168 million over 4 years going to the Maori Health Authority to actually commission services, right? If you do the quick maths, it's 1.5% of your total spend. You know, is that true partnership? Is it enough?
Look, I think that's a misrepresentation of the way funding is going to work for Māori in this new health system. So that is money, as you say, specifically for the commissioning of by Māori for Māori services. Sitting alongside that is about $40 million for more Māori in the health workforce, $30 million for our Māori health providers to make sure they're supported, $20 million for our iwi Māori partnership boards. And then you've got the services that are currently provided via the main health budget that the Māori Health Authority will have some say in how they're delivered. And Māori still make use of all the hospitals, of all the ambulances, of all the things that are in the overall health system. But actually, this budget is the first time we've given this kind of money, $160 million, to be able to say to the Māori Health Authority, by Māori, for Māori, direct commissioning, you go and do it. And as I said earlier today, we're just beginning here in addressing the decades-long inequities that we've got in health, and it's a start. There will be more, but that is not the whole quota of how much money Māori Health gets from this budget.
So extra funding for Pharmac, right? Is there a timeline for the drug buying agency to make its decisions about these? Because the Health Minister has said he's got an assurance it's going to include cancer drugs, but the people who want these drugs do not have a lot of time. So what's your expectation in terms of time frame?
Totally agree with that, and we did give Pharmac a heads up about the fact that they were going to be getting a budget increase so that they could start doing more of the planning and more of the buying, and it's certainly my expectation as Finance Minister we'll hear about that very soon.
What soon, Minister? Weeks rather than months?
I'd certainly hope so, Lisa, yes.
You had your budget day cheese roll today, eh?
I did, yep.
How much is a block of cheese these days? A kilo of Tasty?
Depends. Well, if it's a kilo of Tasty, I read that you'd be paying over $20 in some supermarkets, 19 in others. You can buy the mild, I think, for about $12 or $13 still.
Yeah, so you'll have a few bucks left after the $27. Thank you for joining us, Minister. That is Finance Minister Grant Robertson joining us from Parliament. It is 27 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Health is one of the major budget items, with $11.1 billion over the next 4 years. It's the biggest government investment in health to date, with a huge focus on creating Health New Zealand and a Maori Health Authority. Health New Zealand, which will replace the district health boards, will get $3.1 billion in funding over the next 2 years. And Pharmac, the government's drug buying agency, will receive an extra $191 million, taking its total funding to $1.2 billion. Outside Parliament today, a group of 30 people, some of whom have rare diseases, were keenly awaiting the news of Pharmac's funding. On a cold and windy day in the capital, the group were wearing beanies reading, "Let me live." Malcolm Mulholland's wife, Wiki, died of breast cancer last year after spending her final months campaigning for better access to medications that Pharmac doesn't fund but are available in places like Australia. Malcolm joins me now. Malcolm, what's your reaction?
It's not enough. It really isn't. Pharmac came out last year and said we need $417 million to clear our wish list of drugs we want to buy, of which there are about 70. On top of that, there are another 280 medicines working their way through Pharmac's system now. So even if we were able to clear the waiting list, and we can't based on what was provided today, how are we going to fund for the other 280 drugs? It's just a drop in the ocean.
So who was there with you today, Malcolm, and how's everybody feeling?
Pretty dejected. There were a lot of tears. Clearly there was a focus on cancer drugs, and even then we'll only see some cancer drugs funded, not all cancer drugs that need to be funded, even within the OFI list. But, we had people there with a chronic illness such as diabetes or Crohn's and colitis, and we had a 2-year-old actually who had flown down from Auckland. She has spinal muscular atrophy. They want Spinraza funded. They were in tears. They were in absolute tears. Felt very let down.
Finance Minister has just said that they gave Pharmac a heads up in order that they could do their homework basically and get things moving quickly. How much confidence do you have on them delivering in a timely manner?
Well, very little, because nothing to date assures me of that they're actually able to achieve that. And we're still waiting for the Pharmac review, a review that was supposed to look at timeliness, transparency, those types of issues. And we still don't know what the recommendations are. So I would have thought that they would have released the report in conjunction with the budget perhaps, so that we can have a better process when it comes to medicines procurement for New Zealand.
Again, the decision is Pharmac's, right? And they're supposed to be making independent decisions. The Health Minister says he's got assurances that cancer drugs will be included in the treatments that they're going to fund. But how do you keep them honest and hold them to account?
Oh, look, I honestly think that the whole Pharmac being independent is just a lie. I mean, clearly the government are directing Pharmac to purchase cancer drugs rather than, say, Trikafta for cystic fibrosis or continuous glucose meters for type 1 diabetics. And we've seen in the past, actually, this incoming Labour government, when they were first elected some 4 years ago, campaigned on getting the drug PrEP funded, which is an anti-HIV drug. Now, good decision. I don't begrudge it being funded, but soon after Labour took office, that drug was funded.
So, Malcolm, are people still going to have to set up I think we might have just lost Malcolm there. That was Malcolm Mulholland, who was joining us there from Parliament. Again, $191 million extra for Pharmac over the next 2 years to purchase drugs. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei e Checkpoint. Nationals Finance spokesperson Nicola Willis is live with her take on the budget. Whangarei locals welcome news of more money to see the dentist, and our expert panel gives us their takes. Te Puea Winiata, Phil O'Reilly and Brad Olsen join us after 6. Homai o whakaro, we'd love your thoughts. What was in the budget for you? What do you make of it all? Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let us know what you think's missing as well. It is time to go to the headlines. Ko Evi anō tēnei.
The Finance Minister admits it's been a tough couple of years for New Zealanders as he delivered his fourth wellbeing budget this afternoon. A centrepiece of the document is a $1 billion cost of living relief package. Just over 2 million people on low and middle incomes will receive a payment of $350, but people receiving the higher winter energy payment aren't eligible. The fuel tax cuts and discount to the diesel road user charges are being extended until August. Community services card holders will continue to get half-price public transport permanently. Health spending is being boosted by just over $13 billion over 4 years. About $500 million will go towards clearing DHB debts to give the new centralised service, Health NZ, and the Maori Health Authority a clean start. $100 million will go towards a business growth fund to help small companies weather the current rocky economic conditions. There's been swift reaction to the budget. The National Party leader claims New Zealanders on the average income won't benefit from the budget's cash sweetener, with Christopher Luxon saying the Finance Minister is failing to manage the cost of living crisis. The Nurses Union says the budget does little to address chronic staffing issues, despite allocating $76 million over 4 years to workforce development. The Nurses Organisation Chief Executive, Paul Galter, says at $19 million a year it amounts to loose change. But Auckland's Mayor, Phil Goff, says the wellbeing budget addresses many of Auckland's issues. He says he particularly welcomes measures that will bring forward government funding for climate change action in the city. In other news, the Hutt Valley DHB says it did not undertake strengthening work on a quake-prone block years ago in order to avoid disruption to patients and services. And a 17-year-old has been arrested, accused of taking part in multiple ram raids in Auckland. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It is time for the business news now, ko taku hoa I nei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Okay, budget day, Nona, right? Business will be pouring through that mighty wodge of paper. What is in it for them?
Well, not a lot, to be honest. The business wasn't expecting an awful lot. We did some stories leading up to it. There was very low expectations for business initiatives. And pretty much that's what businesses felt they got. They got a $100 million capital growth fund, but the details not quite known, and it does rely on the banks coming to the party. That's not a guarantee. So how that works, no one quite knows.
Is it like a shared scheme? You get some money from the bank, you get some money from the
that's
government.
the idea. But there's very little detail there for businesses to get their teeth into. And look, the bottom line is that they don't see this as a visionary budget. It's a lot of short-term fixes, which is fair enough. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed. But overall, businesses are saying they need more staff. They didn't see anything that really addressed the immigration issues. They're worried about the cost of living and the crippling effect that's having on their own costs and their ability to pass on those costs to consumers. So basically, they're saying they need more, and they're looking for some long-term vision from the government. They didn't get it, but, they weren't expecting it either.
So what did the markets look like?
Well, the markets really had a very awful start following a terrible downturn in the Wall Street market. Asia picked up a little bit. So we we started out 1.3% down, finished 0.5% down or a drop of 51 points to 11,207. Not so bad. The New Zealand dollar, very little changed and narrowly mixed, I would say. So a little bit of up and down there and there. 63.4 US cents, 90.4 Australian, and 51.2 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. I'll let you get back to poring over those budget documents.
I'll be at it all night.
Nona Peltier with business news there. $188 million has been set aside for the Maori Health Authority to mana hauora. The government says it's a significant step to addressing long-documented inequities, but it's a sum that's unlikely to quell its critics, with the announced funding a mere drop in the bucket of a record health spend. Here's Māori News reporter Jamie Tahana.
Te Mana Hauora will get $168 million over the next 4 years, $33 million in the first year and $45 million annually after that. Plus, there's $20 million for iwi Māori partnership boards. With that, the authority will directly fund and commission its own services and initiatives with Māori providers, who will also get $30 million this budget for support and infrastructure. The Māori Development Minister, Willie Jackson, says it's a significant day for Māori health.
We know that it's going to be a hard beginning for them, but we're very excited. We've worked hand in hand with providers, and we know there's a lot of support for the pūtea we've got there.
There's great hope for the Maori Health Authority, a means to resolve decades of well-documented inequities. Māori die younger and suffer higher rates of illness. Māori health providers have been underfunded for decades, receiving far less than other organisations for providing the same services. But what's been announced today is a mere fraction of the overall $11 billion 4-year spend. The Chief Executive of Ngāti Hine Health Trust, Jeff Milner, says after all the hype, he expected more. But there's still cause for optimism.
All of us shouldn't just expect one entity called the Maori Health Authority to carry the burden of 180 years of non-delivery for Māori. That perhaps another way of looking at it is that the Maori Health Authority have a budget that provides real creativity, innovation out there on the edge.
Te Pāti Māori, however, is less optimistic. Co-leader Rawiri Waititi calling the allocation pathetic.
It's 0.7% of the total health budget going into the Maori Health Authority, and that's not good enough. If we want to close mortality rates for Māori, where we're dying 7 to 10 years earlier than everybody else, we wanted to bring the statistics down to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, where we're overrepresented. We need a hell of a lot more investment than that.
But Associate Health Minister Puea Winiata insists there is more. He says he wants to grow the workforce and Māori provider capacity first.
We also want to point out collectively that there is a lot of money already sitting in the system. In fact, we approximate it to be about $1.2 billion over the next 4 years, of which the Maori Health Authority, alongside Health New Zealand, will have the ability to commission full kaupapa Māori services.
But what for its future? There's an election next year, polls are neck and neck, and neither National nor ACT support the Maori Health Authority. National's leader Christopher Luxon hasn't said whether a national government would get rid of it, but he says it will make little difference.
And it's another competing bureaucracy, by its own admission, won't deliver a single improved outcome for Māori for 5 years, and that's not good enough. We want to get improved outcomes.
ACT's David Seymour supports the devolution of health, but is against the Maori Health Authority.
What ACT resents is that we have, first of all, a sort of co-governance of healthcare where two entities can veto each other's national health plans. We think that's wrong. And second of all, we've only done it for one category of people.
But the government insists today's funding will make a huge difference for tangata whenua health.
And a lot of feedback coming in on this issue. Let's just do a couple right now. This one says, it's from Keith from Upper Hutt. Hi, Keith. My 200k mortgage is going from 2.69% to 4.39%. That's an extra $3,400 in interest I need to pay each year. Wowza. $350 doesn't go far, says Keith. But Suzette says, I'll kick off the budget debate. $350 sure beats $100 tax cut under the National Party per year. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101. And on that note, National has dubbed today's budget as backwards and a blowout. Finance spokesperson Nicola Willis joins me now. Kia ora, Nicola.
Kia ora.
Hey, let's start with what you loved in the budget. Name one thing that you thought was great.
Well, I loved that the Treasury still get to issue their own report warning us about what's going to happen with debt and spending, and they were very straight up and honest about that. And I tell you what, it's a dark picture. And my view is that if they weren't there actually publishing that information, then we might not know about it, because Grant Robertson has not only spent the money he said he would in this budget, which is $5.9 billion, a record amount, but he's actually dipped into next year's spending too, taken $2 billion from there, and he's dipped into the year after that spending as well, taking $500 million from there. So this is a record amount of spending, and Treasury
is very
clear in their
Nicola?
reporting.
Not a single thing that you supported or would keep? Nothing.
Well, I think where we're coming from is, like most New Zealanders, we want to see better education services, better health services, better outcomes in housing. But what we've learned with this government is when they announce more money for things, that doesn't necessarily mean better results. You know, in housing, we had the $2 billion allocated to Kiwi Build. We had 100,000 houses promised. Actually, only 1,300 have ever turned up. The State House waiting list has quadrupled. Last night, 4,500 children slept in a motel. So what we've learned is it's not enough to say we're spending money on it. What we have to see is outcomes.
And you've made that point several times. So what I would like from you, if possible, please, is some specifics. If you think that this budget is a massive blowout, which you have stated many times, and that the Labour government is addicted to spending, let's go through it. What would you carve off? So the cost of living payment, would you deny people $27 a week?
Well, we would much prefer to give permanent tax relief. We've put forward a fully costed plan, very detailed, in which we say that we should inflation index the income thresholds for tax. That would mean for a taxpayer on $55,000, they would get $800 a year. That's a lot more than what Labor is committing to them, but it's also something they can permanently look forward to. So it's not just for a few months, it's every year into the future. And we think that's a much better alternative.
That's not targeting your squeezed middle, though, is it? That's giving it to everybody. Even the people who make the most and own the most, they'd benefit from that as well.
Well, our tax reduction plan would mean that the squeezed middle could look forward to good tax reduction. So someone on the average wage, $72,000 a year, would get $950 back each year. And it would mean that everyone who's working hard, paying tax, could look forward to paying a little bit less. Because our view is, when the finance minister is taking in billions upon billions more in tax, letting inflation push people into higher tax brackets, actually he should give a little bit of it back. And we don't think a temporary ban band-aid measure suffices.
So the squeezed middle, which you have spoken about a lot, can you please give me a definition? Give me their earnings, tell me who they are. Be really specific. Who is the squeezed middle in your mind?
Sure. Squeezed middle are those New Zealanders, they're not on a benefit, they're earning money, they're not eligible for any government entitlements, they're not eligible for working for families or the accommodation.
So how much do they make, Nicola, so we can have an
hard.
idea?
Well, if you took an average income New Zealand household earning $110,000, typically they won't be getting working for families. If you took any taxpayer actually who doesn't have children, typically they won't be getting.
So 110
working
a household. 110 a household. Do you reckon that's the squeezed middle? So has Grant
Lisa,
Robertson set the bar too low?
Point. I want to make a really clear point here, and that is that there are a lot of New Zealanders suffering with the cost of living who aren't getting help from the government and who are facing increased pressures at the supermarket, at the petrol pump, when they're paying their rent, when they're paying their mortgage. And I can tell you, I hear from them every week. They say to me, look, I don't think this government has my back. I am working really hard to try and get my family ahead. We're trying really hard to rearrange our household budget to manage the cost, and we can't. And each week we feel like we're slipping backwards. And what we saw in the budget today, Lisa, is that sense of feeling like you're slipping backwards is set to continue because inflation, which is the thief in everyone's pocket right now, is set to continue, not just this year, but next year and the year after that. So this phenomenon of prices increasing every time you blink, that's set to continue. And I know that that will make a lot of New Zealanders feel very insecure.
Nicola?
And look, a 3-month band-aid payment, that won't cut it.
We're almost out of time, so could I have a yes or no answer to this question? Would you have cut spending in order to get back to surplus faster?
Well, we would not be spending much as Grant Robertson in this budget. That is absolutely the case. I can give you that confirmation, Lisa.
So you would be back in surplus earlier. You would cut spending to get back to surplus earlier. Is that what you're saying?
If we return to the Treasury business next year, we will have a fiscal repair job on our hands. And part of the job we will be doing is returning New Zealand's books to balance. We can't continue in deficit forever.
Appreciate your time. That is Nicola Willis, who's finance spokesperson for the National Party. More free dental care will be within reach for people on low incomes, with emergency dental grants more than tripling as part of this year's budget. They're rising from $300 to $1,000. People on the streets of Whānau told our reporter Katie Todd they think it's a good move.
I think it's way overdue. I'm a nurse and I see lots of people with major dental health problems come into the emergency department because they've become septic from dental decay, and it's not good.
I think that young people need that sort of help and stuff at the moment with the economy the way it is. Everybody I know is struggling, so...
Yeah, that's good, hearing all these money changes and making it easier for young parents like me.
Yes, I'd take that one easily, yeah.
Well, I don't get dental care. I think he charges far too much, and about 8 years ago I decided to stop getting dental care. So I brush my teeth once a day, and that's all the dental care I have.
I think this is a great thing. Anything to do with your health, I'm on board with that.
For Māori, the budget includes $580 million of spending across health, social and justice sectors. The Maori Health Authority, Te Mana Hauora Māori, gets $168 million for Maori health services over 4 years. That's only about 1.5% of the approximately $11 billion of new health spending. The budget also includes $167 million for Whānau Ora to support kaupapa Māori approaches to wellbeing. Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency Director of Health Reforms, Lance Norman, joins me now. Kia ora, Lance.
Kia ora, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very well. Did the budget meet your expectations in terms of spending on Māori health?
Oh, the budget actually never meets my expectation because you have a great build-up on these awesome things that may occur and they don't occur. There are always good elements of a budget, but then when you look behind the proportionality, it doesn't really address some significant issues we have in our communities.
Okay, so name me one thing that you thought was great and then tell me which ones you're not so happy with.
Oh, I think there's an element of greatness to most things, like the $350 sort of rebate for people to help them through, the winter is a good thing. What's not good is it excludes beneficiaries, and it excludes people who are on a sort of winter subsidy already. So whilst the headline looked good, it probably won't cover as many people as we thought. Like I would have had that equally included for people who are eligible for the winter subsidy. What is good is there is some investment in the Maori Health Authority, and there is some investment in the Whānau water budget. But when you look at the proportionality, you mentioned the 160 million.
Yeah.
There's another 20 on top of that for iwi Māori Partnership Board. So I think the total number is 180 million, which sounds like a lot. But if you divide that by 4 years, because this is a 4-year budget, and then you divide that by 800,000 Māori living in our country, you get to about $50 per person to address some of the health discrepancies we have. And then when I look at $11.1 billion going into the whole healthcare system, you'd have to say that's quite disproportionate relative to the need we have in our communities.
So what does $50 buy you in terms of Māori health then?
Well, it might get you one dental appointment. It might get you one visit to the GP, maybe two. It might pay for your pharmaceutical prescriptions. It might pay for your taxis to one of your cancer treatment or diabetes treatment care. It might pay for your parking while you're visiting someone who's in hospital. And that's one intervention that would pay. In reality, we know we need much more than that. There's quite a bit of struggle at the moment. COVID is still a big issue on people getting access to kai, getting access to medical appointments. So we are seeing some significant pressures in our communities out there, and that kind of doesn't seem proportionate to what we need to address.
Yeah, well, when you talk about proportion, should the amount of money going into the Maori Health Authority be based on the percentage of the population that is Māori? Should that be the chunk of the overall budget that you get?
Well, it would be logical that if 20% of all New Zealanders are Māori or have Māori whakapapa, it would be logical that 20% of vote health was spent on that portion of our society. Now, it would be logical it would sit in the Maori Health Authority, or it would be logical it's the Health Authority works closely with other funders. But when you have all this money going through historically DHBs and Ministry of Health, which will change 1 July, and it hasn't been utilised appropriately, and the fact you've got to write off $3.1 billion of your health budget to cover a deficit, it would appear not a good use of money.
So, Lance, Māori health providers, arguably during COVID, which you've mentioned is still a big drain on resources, Māori health providers have pulled a really heavy load during COVID. Yes. Is that recognised in today's allocations?
Not at all. I'll give you an example. So our Whānau Water network has done over 600,000 vaccinations in the last 6 months or so. 10% of those were Māori whānau, 90% were non-Māori. So what that shows to me is not only have we've been reaching out to our own Māori communities, we've actually been reaching out to other communities. Now, that's a great thing. Now, the announcement today, there was no COVID rollover, and we still have COVID in our communities. We still have home isolations. There was no COVID money rolled over for those providers who have been working their absolute guts out for the last 12 months to protect all of our communities, not just Māori communities. So there was no recognition of A, that hard work, or B, the fact that hard work is still required post 1 July of this year.
Really appreciate your time, Lance. Ngā mihi mō te rā. That is Lance Norman, who's Whānau Orders Commissioning Agency, who's the Director of Health Reforms there. People over the age of 18 who earn less than $70,000 will get a $350 payment over 3 months. It excludes beneficiaries and pensioners. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us again now from Auckland. Nick, how's that going down there?
Yeah, well, of course, as you say, Lisa, that's sort of the headline of this budget, I suppose you could say, that $350. But we really want to try and understand how much of a difference it is going to make. Of course, it is one-off and people are really struggling at the moment. And to talk about that a little bit, I'm joined by Peter Shimwell, who works for LifeWise. Their building is just behind us. Peter, thanks for joining us. I suppose, first of all, can you just talk to us about the sorts of people you're dealing with day to day, some of the issues they're facing, some of their predicaments? Who are these people and what struggles are they facing?
Yeah, kia ora, good evening. So look, LifeWise works with some of the most marginalised people in New Zealand. Look, here in Auckland we work with the homeless and youth around social housing. You know, people that have been disconnected from the system for many years and are really in hardship. And we don't really see many wins from these budget announcements. And unfortunately, if you live at the margins, you really miss out. And, really we live in a society where it seems as though the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And certainly those that we work with are in that poverty trap. And there's not many wins from this budget from our point of view.
Yeah, well, let's get into that. I mean, we were discussing off camera, $350 one-off payment. It's a good headline, isn't it? But in terms of actual difference, what do you think it's going to make?
Look, it does seem like a headline to us, look, it's going to be very helpful for people that are eligible, but there are groups that we work with who just won't feel that benefit at all. Look, the under-18s, for instance, 16, 17-year-old rangatahi young people that are on youth payment, they won't feel any of that benefit. And we know from our work, for our youth housing and youth homelessness work, young people really struggle. It's their first time, living away from home, very, very little support, no support around budgeting. And really, we see people sort of living on scraps. And, it's a real concern that they're going to miss out on this. We do acknowledge that there's been, some help for people around transport and those that have got community cards. But again, look, Auckland's one of the most expensive cities in the world. It's really, really difficult for people to make ends meet. And the rising costs, the cost of food, the cost of fuel, the cost of transport, pushes those that are on the margins who are really disproportionately disadvantaged by the rise in the cost of living just into further hardship. I'm really concerned about that.
So just quickly, Peter, I guess a final word, if we can, on this budget, and perhaps a grade even.
Look, the government came in and they told us they're going to be transformational. They've put a lot of money into health. We acknowledge that, and they're trying real hard. But look, the truth is, if you're living in Auckland and you're living in hardship, there's not much to be pleased about in this budget. So, we've still got a lot of work to do.
Hey, thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate your time this evening. And Lisa, of course, the other thing, as Peter just mentioned, that will come off shortly, in the next couple of months, are drops in the level of fuel excise that people are having to pay at the moment. When that comes off, of course, there will be even more sting at the petrol pump. And rest assured, we will have plenty more stories throughout the year when that happens. Back to you, Lisa.
Nick Trowbridge there, live from downtown Auckland, and he mentioned fuel tax reduction. So another 2-month extension to the fuel tax reduction and half-price public transport has been met with relief by many on the streets of Whānau. The government's also announced New Zealanders with Community Services Card will get half-price public transport permanently from mid-September. People told our reporter Katie Todd getting around Northland is costing them enough already.
Yes, very happy to hear that one, yeah. We all need to move around, but I'm interested in the move towards hybrid or electric cars, but till I can get one, I'm happy with that.
I mean, I've got this one obviously, so fuel is pretty expensive sometimes.
It's a start, because as we know, fuel is also terribly expensive now.
And do you think it should go longer?
I think it should keep going, yes, definitely.
I have a car, so gas is getting more expensive now. It's going up again. So I feel like that would be a good thing.
Well, I guess money comes from somewhere, right? So you'll know in the future, I guess, if that's a good step, I do like those low prices, but however, at the cost of what, at the cost of what? Some other areas are going to miss out on funding through those sort of schemes, so I'm not 100% sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah.
In the long term, I don't know. It's sticking plasters, really. I don't know that things are really being addressed at a deeper level.
OK, some of your feedback and thoughts on the budget now. This person says the greedy whingers saying $350 will not help should refuse to accept it or donate it to charity. Another listener says, I was excited to hear about the $350 cost of living payment, only to find out I do not qualify. The permanent half-price transport isn't useful where there is no public transport. All up, it can only be described as a budget with a false glimmer of hope. Actually, a few of you are raising the issue about the transport relief to payments, saying that in your area you don't really have it. This listener says, I live in New Plymouth and public transport is so bad, a free service is no incentive for me to use it. Unless public transport infrastructure and timetable issues are resolved, things will not change for me. I suspect this issue would apply to other provincial cities. You suspect correctly based on our feedback. Another person says, nothing specific for me, but the money is going to the right places. B+ rating. Yeah, tell us what you think you'd rate it. Another person says excluding those on benefits from the cost of living one-off is absurd and cruel, particularly when the Reserve Bank is forecasting higher levels of unemployment in the foreseeable future. On the other hand, this person reckons shades of typical communists, token gesture of $350 in a one-off hush payment. And Johnny the pensioner's got in touch to say the lower user rate for power has just been removed, increasing my bill by 50%. One-off sweetener excludes me.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Finance Minister says the $350 cash payment to about 2 million New Zealanders announced in today's budget recognises that some people are struggling with the high cost of living, while others like him don't need help. The payment is for those over 18 earning less than $70,000 and not getting the winter energy payment. Grant Robertson has told Checkpoint it was a careful decision.
We needed to strike a balance here of doing something that wouldn't overly exacerbate the very problem we're trying to resolve, inflation, and untargeted approaches like the tax cuts Nationals are proposing could potentially have exacerbated inflation much more than what we settled on here.
Grant Robertson says beneficiaries and those on the lowest incomes are already getting help. The government's allocating a whopping $11 billion in today's budget to set up and initially run the new health system. About $1.8 billion will be used just to clear deficits. Health New Zealand and the Maori Health Authority will start to replace the country's 20 district health boards from July. DHB debt has long been a problem, with many of them operating in a permanent state of deficit. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says the funding will allow the new system to start life on a stable financial footing. There's also money set aside to fund new drugs, new ambulances and crew, and some upgrades to hospitals. Pharmac has received a funding boost to secure more medicines. $191 million will go to the drug buying agency over the next 2 years. The boost is the biggest ever increase to Pharmac's medicines budget, but Health Minister Andrew Little acknowledges some people will always feel left out.
Well, you could say of health spending, no amount is ever enough. There is always more we could spend on health. There will always be a clinician, an expert, a specialist, a patient, their whānau who could say, but what about this? Could we have that, please?
While the decisions themselves will be left to Pharmac, the focus will be on better cancer treatments. Te Pāti Māori claims the government's budget provides only a bunch of crumbs for Māori. Nearly $580 million will go towards Māori health and wellbeing. The Maori Health Authority will receive $188 million over 4 years for direct commissioning of services. But party co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer says Māori will receive less than 1% in total of the government's $157 billion budget. Today's budget heralded the end of the school decile system. From next year, a new equity index will allocate extra funding for students from deprived backgrounds. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, reports.
Deciles divide schools into 10 groups according to the percentage of children from disadvantaged neighbourhoods. Educators say they're blunt, and many people misunderstand how the numbers are calculated and what they mean. From January, the equity index replaces the decile. It uses data about individual students, not their neighbourhoods, and will be recalculated annually rather than after each census. Schools get $161 million in extra funding for disadvantage, and the budget adds a further $75 million a year from next year. Most schools will get more money from the index, but from 2024, about 200 will get less.
The Treasury has confirmed it's investigating an early release of details from the budget by the Wall Street Journal. The news site published key details from the budget an hour before the embargo lifted at 2 o'clock. In other news, the local share market has dodged any major fallout from the slide in US markets overnight. Wall Street's main indices were hammered on renewed concerns about inflation and an economic slowdown after downbeat earnings from retailers. The benchmark NZX Top 50 opened down 1.3%, but clawed back much of its losses through the day to close less than 0.5% lower. The Hutt City Council says it did not treat the local health board any differently to any other building owner. The DHB supplied a 10-year-old seismic assessment last year to persuade the council that the Heretaunga block was not earthquake-prone. It's been revealed this week it was quake-prone at a low 15% of standard. In December 2019, the council gave the DHB a year to do a new seismic assessment. However, a year ago, the council accepted its old assessment. The council says the 2011 report met the official criteria of being done by a qualified engineer, and it judged the building was not quake-prone. And some motorists are facing an hour-and-a-half delay on Christchurch's northern motorway because of a crash. Wakakotahi says wreckage has been cleared, but 2 southbound lanes on Waimakariri Bridge were closed for more than an hour this afternoon, causing kilometres of backlog. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Our Changing World samples the seaweed in Otago Harbour. Motoko Kakubayashi is on the line from Tokyo, Japan. Fergus Grady joins us from the Cannes Film Festival, but he's also excited about the upcoming French Film Festival back here in Aotearoa. While our digital native Charlie Cuff has been thinking about how artificial intelligence might help us take better care of our elderly. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Periods of rain, possibly heavy, easing to a few showers this evening, showers becoming more frequent and heavier tomorrow morning. Scattered rain is forecast for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. From Waitomo to Wellington, including the Central High Country and Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough. Occasional rain with squally thunderstorms and hail possible, easing to showers for Nelson and Marlborough tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy, squally thunderstorms and hail, easing tomorrow evening. Canterbury, periods of rain about Canterbury High Country, otherwise mainly fine. Showers are spreading north tomorrow morning, then becoming confined to the coast later. For Otago and Southland, showers possibly heavy with thunderstorms in the west, easing tomorrow afternoon or evening. And for the Chatham Islands, rains developing this evening, clearing tomorrow morning but returning tomorrow night. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. You might have noticed it's budget day, and that can mean a soup of numbers followed by an avalanche of press releases and PR speak. But here's some of the big ticket items. A cost of living package that will see more than 2 million Kiwi qualify for a one-off payment of $350. The half-price public transport fares will be extended for another 2 months till August, and beyond that for people with a community services card. Health gets a record $11.1 billion over the next 4 years, with a focus on creating Health New Zealand and a Maori Health Authority. And we've got an expert panel to help make sense of the dollars. Te Puea Winiata, whakapapas to Ngāti Ranginui and has worked in mental health and addiction services, and now the kai whakahaere at Turuku Healthcare, an NGO providing health and social services in South Auckland. Phil O'Reilly is a business leader and managing director of consultancy Iron Duke Partners, and he was on the government's welfare expert advisory group. And Brad Olsen, Infometrics principal economist and the guy who explains big budget concepts in plain English. Tēnā koutou.
How you doing, Older?
Let's start with a whip around, eh? And I need you to give this budget a grade. Let's use old school ABCDs. Te Puea, what do you reckon it gets and why?
I'd give it a C. Mainly because we thought that maybe we would see a little bit more in Maori health. I heard Rawiri Waititi talking today about if we're only at 2.3% of the total house budget. We could have actually stretched up to 17%, which would be in line with our population, and I totally agree with that. But as usual, mighty health providers out in the sector are really good at making do, and also will make sure that the money goes to where it needs to go to get those outcomes for whānau.
Okay, so a C from you, Te Puea. Let's see what Brad reckons. What grade do you give it?
Oh, I'd probably give it a B to a B minus. It had a lot of intention, but it also had a lot of different answers to a whole lot of different problems. Probably not the cohesiveness that I would have liked to have seen in the short term. We know that there are some huge challenges in front of people. I think the long-term stuff was actually quite good. There's a lot of settings that we're getting right for future New Zealanders if the government can deliver. But those short-term challenges around the cost of living and similar, yes, there were some steps taken today, but you do just worry about, well, is that enough? Is there enough support there for middle-income Kiwis?
Okay, Phil, what do you give it?
I could give it a C minus or a D or something. I mean, it was a strange old budget, wasn't it? A weird old thing. It was, let's spend a fortune on health. Some of that good spending, some of it wasteful as usual with the big numbers, and do some other stuff. But then in the middle of it all, let's just dump in some stuff on looking after the squeezed middle, or the Kiwis who are doing it tough. It just felt like that was unplanned. It was almost as if the government kind of, I'm probably being a bit harsh, but they kind of dreamt it up last week. And
Phil, do you reckon it was a tack on? Do you reckon it was a tack on for political purposes?
And that's why I've downgraded them a bit on it. Otherwise, I would have been giving them a C on this budget. But it just doesn't have a narrative. Grant Robertson says what we want is to have, productive, well-paid workforces and so on, all that stuff that nobody could disagree with. But this has nothing to do with that. This is a 2 or 3 month temporary payment, some of which is internally inconsistent. So you can't make it easier to go drive your car, and apparently that's against climate change thinking. At the same time, make it easier to do public transport. You do one or the other, I would have thought, and both of those measures pretty untargeted. So, just felt like it was a bit made up, and as a result, I mark it down for that reason.
Te Puea, do you think the government got it right in terms of targeting that extra $350 that's for people who make under 70K, they've got to be 18 years or over, can't be a beneficiary? So have they got the right target audience for that?
I have to say that during the last Omicron outbreak, we certainly saw a lot of the working poor coming forward for financial assistance so that they could stay at home with their whānau. But $350 is a hard one, really, to say that it's going to be really useful over the next few months, particularly as we move into the next outbreak, probably June, July, and that's going to cause another series of heartbreak and difficulties. A lot of our whānau are dealing with also a significant amount of debt. Debt created because they are having to borrow, high interest rates on that borrowing to make ends meet.
So, Brad, that is only over 3 months, averages out at $27 a week. I mean, how does that track against the increased costs people are facing with inflation and the fact that it's only temporary?
Well, and part of that's important, but part of it also highlights the challenge the government has in front of it. $27 a week, it's what, a block of cheese and a cup of coffee. Realistically, we know from our analysis of metrics that at the end of last year, and we know it's gotten worse since then, that the average Kiwi household was spending an extra $70 to $100 a week just on the essentials. That's the likes of food, power, fuel, and rent or a mortgage or similar. So $27 goes some way, but it's certainly not enough. But to be fair, and I think this is important, the government did have a real challenge trying to balance out, trying to provide some temporary and targeted support, but also not going so big that it actually added to inflation more generally. So they did have a big trade-off. I think what we are seeing, though, Treasury today lifted their expectations of how long and how high inflation will be around. My worry is that you've got 2 more months after June of the fuel support, then you've got 3 months of $27 a week, and then what? Absolutely nothing at a time when inflation will remain above 3% per annum until 2025 now. So there is still a lot of pain. I guess what happens, right, when we get through to the end of October? Do we just go completely cold turkey at a time when we know people are stressed out? So it's a challenging position for the government. I certainly don't envy them. But realistically, you do wonder if there has to be more to come to support those low-income Kiwis.
Phil, let's bring you back in. What is in this for business? Did you have a good search through the pages? What did you find?
Yeah, not a lot. There's actually my favourite single line item was the apprenticeship boost program. That's very good. That's the idea that you help employers a bit who take on an apprentice, and with the government making it much harder to get migrants across the border over the next year or two, it was absolutely necessary that they invested. I think that will be welcomed. I know it's welcomed by business because it was what the last time they did it. It was welcomed by business. Other than that, business would have been looking for some messages around infrastructure spend. They've got a little bit of that, but not a lot in the areas that they like, things like roads, port infrastructure, logistics infrastructure, and so on. Not a lot there, but some, to be fair. And they would have been looking for much more a story about how is government going to put business at the centre to become more competitive, to become more productive, to actually make New Zealand's living standards much more permanently affordable, and there wasn't really much of that today. But having said that, of course, Lisa, I don't think anybody would have been holding their breath. There would have been a thirst for this particular government to have put that front and square. They lost an opportunity to do that, not surprisingly, really.
So, Phil, earlier in the week we had the emissions budget and the spending there, and it has been suggested that was corporate welfare, subsidising highly profitable businesses to make the transition to greener business. Is it corporate welfare?
Yes, it is. Quite a lot of it is. That's the whole idea of an emissions price. When you put a price on carbon and it goes up, what you do is you want businesses, and consumers too, by the way, to escape that price of carbon by investing elsewhere. So if it gets too high, I go and buy an EV or I ride a bike. It's the same with business. So quite a lot of that, I agreed with Luxon on this. I thought that is corporate welfare. And really what government should be doing is investing where it's unlikely that businesses will be able to invest by themselves. So a good example of this, I know it's the farmers, but investing heavily in methane mitigation research, that matters because you've got thousands of smallholder farmers who aren't going to be able to invest in all of that by themselves. And if you can crack that science problem, not only do you solve a big part of New Zealand's problem, but it'll also be used by those thousands of businesses. So that's one of the reasons why government invests in those kinds of R&D projects. So not all of it was corporate welfare, but certainly when you're getting subsidies to go take your coal-fired boiler out and put something else in, that's corporate welfare, and I disagree with it.
Let's move to health now. Te Puea, this is your mastermind subject, so let's start with you, right? 168 million over 4 years for the Maori Health Authority to commission services. This is actually to buy services. That's on average 42 million a year. How far does that go?
Well, that will be the key question to ask, because also what was announced today is that although we're only 2.3% of the health budget, there is other money across the health numbers that we're getting. But in reality, 2.3% is not enough. The 41 or 44% $1 million that is coming out each year. Again, that's a drop in the bucket in terms of really for us looking long term, the catch up that was required pre-COVID to address Maori health outcomes. Now we've got this other layer of work to do to provide catch-up. So it's a little bit light, but it all comes down to the systems that actually allow the funding to get right down to the partners, the Māori partners on the ground who are delivering services to Whānau, as well as supporting Whānau to have their voice to bring up the issues that are on top for them. So it's going to be an interesting time. Big numbers, a lot of funding going into infrastructure. I have to say that, you know, when you have a look at the infrastructure for Health New Zealand versus the Maori Health Authority, there still seems to be this kind of imbalance there. So we're looking to see how more funding can be promised into the Maori Health Authority to make the new health reforms make a difference for Whānau.
Brad, this was the really big ticket item, right? $11.1 billion. Grant Robertson said for a number of days that he wants to get balance in this budget, money for the here and now, and then money for the future. Did he get it right with the health spend?
I think the government had to make some big investments here into health because we know that things are in a dire state. It was encouraging to see, of course, we know the population has grown faster than our budgeting and finance rules seem to be able to move with. So the government getting rid of those deficits that the DHBs have pulled together, really that's, some people call it an accounting deficit, other people will call it an underfunding of health. But clearing those through, I think, was important. Also great to see and important, I think, to see a number of more provincial areas get upgrades to their health facilities. Whānau, which of course RNZ Sam Ollie has pursued with quite a lot of focus recently. I mean, look, that's my hometown, and I can tell you how broken it is. So that was important to see. You might well need to see a bit more funding going through for the hut perhaps sometime soon. But realistically, my big challenge there is that we can get all of this funding together for Health New Zealand for the infrastructure for our wider healthcare system. But if we can't pay our nurses and our allied health professionals properly, we have no people to do the work that needs to be done. So I would have liked to have seen a bit more support coming forward there. We know that government nurses organisations, there's a huge amount of furore still over the funding there for actual people. If we don't get that right, we don't get the entire system working.
Phil, I'm interested in your thoughts on that one. Labour shortage, right? And we're investing money and into the health system, into mental health and addiction services, where we're already short of psychiatrists and mental health nurses, and basically everyone we need. There was some money today for workforce recruitment, especially for the Maori Health Authority, but are we going far enough with getting the people we need?
Not even close. I mean, what blew me away when the government made that immigration rebalance announcement a few weeks ago to the Business New Zealand audience was how nurses were not on this mythical green list, this new thing that they've come up with, which is really just an old thing with a new name, about fast entry and effectively a guaranteed entry and a guaranteed pathway towards citizenship. It just blew my mind that we weren't putting many more health professionals in that list, and some of the reasons appeared to be that it was going to be too expensive and the health system didn't want to pay for all this. I mean, we really do need to overcome that. And Brad's absolutely right that when you think about it, and if you also think about what's going to happen with Maori, I mean, shameful what's gone on there over the last 20 years. If you think about making a difference there, then the biggest difference will actually not be stethoscopes. It'll be people. It'll be digital and all the rest, but you need to put it through people. And they're the people that build trust. They're the people that understand what's going on those communities. So I would have put them front and square, I must say, and got on with it. And I thought it was a missed trick that we continue to talk about other stuff and balance sheets when in fact we really should be talking about doctors and nurses and psychiatrists and so on who will actually help make people better.
Kia ora rā, e hoa. Good kōrero from you all. Thank you for joining us. That was our panel. Phil O'Reilly, a business leader and consultant with Iron Duke Partners, Te Puea Winiata, who is from Turuku Health, and of course Brad Olsen, Infometrics principal economist, straight speaking plain English economics. Thanks, Brad. It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now let's get to some other news now. Parents of Orewa College students are concerned for their safety after two brutal assaults surfaced online. Two students from the North Auckland school have been excluded, and the school held a meeting for parents and caregivers last night to discuss solutions to the spate of violence. Jonty Dine reports.
Both videos showed students being beaten while on the ground, and one parent says they are not isolated incidents.
I was quite horrified and sickened by it. I was quite concerned how desensitised my 13 and 16-year-old children are to these kinds of things. By all accounts, our kids are seeing this all the time, and they're seeing it on school buses, they're seeing it out after school, and that's probably the concern.
The school held a meeting for parents and caregivers last night to discuss the troubling footage.
Going to school and being safe is kind of a basic right as a student, and if we're kind of at that grassroots level of having to worry about that, then you obviously start worrying about the academic side and everything else that comes with the repercussions. So definitely some concerns around safety.
She says most parents are willing to work with the school, but they need to see some concrete action to prevent further assaults.
I think I initially went into that meeting concerned they didn't take our concerns seriously enough. I walked away thinking they've heard the message loud and clear. Now it's up to them to put their money where their mouth is. Am I 100% confident we're going to see change? Possibly not. But I do think they're starting to hear us and understand that the current approach is clearly not working.
She says students are not willing to speak out against these assaults as they don't want to be seen as snitches.
Immediately, we need to see beefed up security at the school. I think the students, particularly these ones that aren't living up to the values of the school, need to see that the school is 100% serious about getting on top of it. And I think if that means bringing in a bit of extra security in the way of police or security guards or whatever is needed, I'd like to see more cameras around the school. Teachers can't be in every place at every time, and that's not their job. You know, the teachers probably aren't feeling 100% safe either.
Orewa Principal Greg Pearce says he was deeply disturbed by the videos.
Like any parent, you're horrified that
that level of violence can be seen and witnessed in any environment involving teenagers. Unfortunately, I have seen a pattern over the years of the use of violence and the type of violence involved increasing.
Mr. Pearce says there are a number of factors contributing to the rise in violence, and they are taking measures to reduce it, such as shortening the lunch hour, having more senior staff in the field, and inviting guest speakers to preach an anti-bullying message.
We will be having a follow-up to the community meeting with a representative group of that group, and as I said, the board will continue to work in consultation with the police were present at the community meeting. I'm fully supportive of our processes moving forward.
Mr. Pearce says the school has offered ongoing support for the victims of the assaults. Senior Sergeant Roger Small of Waitemata North Police says a 14-year-old has been referred to youth aid following the assault at Orewa College. Inquiries into the second assault are ongoing. Mr. Small says police are concerned by the violence shown in these videos and continue to ask the community to cease sharing footage any further. Tomorrow, Orewa and other colleges will mark Pink Manaaki Day, which raises awareness of anti-bullying.
In Australia, the political leaders are on a last-minute campaign blitz in marginal seats ahead of the federal election on Saturday. However, millions of Australians have already made their minds up, with 3.2 million having already cast their vote. The ABC's David Sparks reports.
At this pre-polling centre in Bellevue Hill in Sydney's eastern suburbs, there are plenty of signs out front promoting the candidates and about a dozen volunteers handing out how-to-vote cards. And there's no queue to get in and vote.
I'm actually going to be away this weekend, so I thought I would get in quick.
Have you voted early before or first time?
First time.
Was it easy?
Super easy. I was in and out within about 10 minutes.
I do live here and it was easy, and I think it's probably a good thing for them to know early how it's going.
Do you always vote early or is it a new thing for you?
Very new thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could. I knew you could do postal votes, but yeah.
So far this election, more than 3.2 million people have already cast their vote in what's known as a pre-poll. Another 2.6 million have applied for a postal vote. Professor Rodney Smith is an early voting expert from the University of Sydney.
At the last election, there was 4.8 million pre-poll votes cast out of an electorate of about 16.4 million voters. This time the overall electorate is bigger, and we'd expect a higher proportion of people to pre-poll vote, so it could easily be 6 million voters.
Do we know if any kind of early polling, pre-polling or postal, favours one side or the other?
Well, postal voting has always traditionally been seen as favouring the Liberal and National parties, and that's partly because of the fact that postal votes are cast in the main by older voters who tend to be a little more conservative. Early in-person voting, so pre-poll voting, there's no party advantage there. The major parties overall do equally well in the early in-person votes.
Finally tonight, a Wisconsin man who lost his false teeth in the Gulf of Mexico last week will be getting them back, and it's all down to a bizarre stroke of luck. A Mississippi man on holiday just happened to find them while he was snorkelling. Hal Shurik with a story to really sink your teeth into.
They actually scared me. I was like, I said, where's the rest of this guy's teeth?
For Aaron and Blair Wellborn, this year's annual Gulf Shores vacation will assuredly rank as the most memorable. It will forever be entwined with that of another family's who they've never met. To get the full story, we need to back up 4 days. Randy Williams of Wisconsin was in the water when the wind blew off his hat.
And I went to grab my hat, and I was sideways, and a wave just come in and hit me alongside the head, and I felt them when I went in the water, and I had them in my hand for a second in the ocean, and way they went.
Williams lost hope, but made the most of his vacation and returned home Friday. About the same time, Wellborn was wrapping up a snorkeling adventure just off the shoreline from his beach rental. He'd taken off his fins and snorkel and was headed to the shore.
And I'm like, well, I'm just going to put my goggles on and look down in the water as I walk up, and maybe just by chance I'll find something. And I stuck my head in the water, and as soon as I stuck my head in the water, they were literally sitting on the bottom just smiling at me.
A closer inspection revealed a name imprinted on the dentures. Now the challenge was on. Find the right Randy Williams and reunite him with his lost uppers. Wellborn went to Facebook and posted pictures of the teeth, and it quickly got attention. Someone in the thread searched out Randy Williams in Gulf Shores, and a hit came back. Contact was made, and within 20 minutes, the right Randy was found.
At first, I thought it was somebody playing a joke on me, and I said, yeah, as I didn't know. And she goes, my cousin found them. And I'm like, are you serious? And she said, yeah. And then she gave me his phone number.
The last few days have been quite the adventure for the Wellborns and Williams' teeth. So much so that the Denture Adventures road trip has taken on a life of its own. The last stop in Alabama, right here at Fox 10 News.
We have laughed a lot.
We've deemed this story, it's a story to really sink your teeth into.
Not creepy at all. Yuck. A lot of feedback on the budget. This listener says, who's in Central Otago, says the winter payment will help, but travel to Dunedin Hospital is 250 k's one way at $3 per litre. Well done, government, for support to well-off Aucklanders. Oh, well, that's where the voters are. A Band-Aid is useful to cover a wound while you heal, so a Band-Aid budget seems a good idea during global trauma. We definitely need to rebuild healthcare before increasing the population. We can't keep shoving 5 million into the system built for 3 million 50 years ago, this person says. On our interview with Nicola Willis, common theme here, Nicola Willis didn't answer your questions. She didn't define her squeezed middle by income other than saying those that are not eligible for government support. That one from Barbara. It's about all we've got time for on Budget Day. The late news team will break it all down for you throughout the night. If you missed anything on Checkpoint or you just want to relive the budget, you can find us on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up's budget breakdown. Northland's Chamber of Commerce boss laments a lack of spending on roading infrastructure.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The Finance Minister says a $350 cash payment, which will be made to around 2 million people, recognises the high cost of living. Today's budget also extends the temporary cut to fuel taxes and half-price public transport. DHB deficits will be wiped and more grants will be available for first home buyers. School deciles will be replaced and early education teachers will get pay parity with school teachers. But National says the budget is no more than a band-aid for people struggling with inflation. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
AUT Business School Professor of Human Resources Management, Jared Ha, is with us. Kia ora, good evening, Jared.
Kia ora, Karen.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them. What do you reckon the workforce is going to be like this time next year? Do you think it'll be the same or different? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but...
Yeah, I think, like the tight labour market we're in now, I think